for AU. The day was officially marked. That was on Sunday, yesterday, but it's just more like a carryover. And many of the official activities are being marked today, as far as the discussions also in the public space and in the media concerning the significance of the AU Day and whether it has any relevance to our current times. We have in the studio Ambassador Kwesi Quartey, is Ghana's Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister. We say thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, and we think it's a privilege for you to spend your morning with us and help us with your rich experience and let us look at African unity and integration. Significantly, when we would have to mark a day like this, then it brings some level of mixed reactions among the African publics. We're talking about citizens on the continent. Do you think that marking the day has any significance at all?
Yes, I think it does, given how far back Africa has come. When you look at Africa today, it is tempting to imagine that it has always been so. But not too long ago, a French and even a British historian could say with confidence that Africa has no history, that the gyrations of barbarous tribes in picturesque places cannot be history. Now, the inferiority of the African was taken for granted. Africa had been the only continent that suffered the slave trade for 400 years. People sought to justify that, okay, Africans were inferior, they sold each other and all that, so they deserve to be where they are. Then society began to awaken, and this started in outside of Africa. In the United States, the first Pan-Africanist Congress took place, and then 5 other congresses took place until 1945 in Manchester, a significant one which was chaired by Du Bois, with Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta as secretaries. And after that, soon came the independence of Ghana, out of which the Pan-Africanist movement moved to its natural home in Ghana, in Africa. Now, at independence, Kwame Nkrumah declared that the independence of Africa could only be linked up with any meaning to the total liberation of the African continent. He was referring to the history of the continent, the slave trade, its devastation, its division into current nation states, and the whole process of trying to disentangle those obstacles to free movement under the theme of African unity and integration for a new Africa. So with Ghana, which has always had unity and integration as a center point of its foreign policy, this is a significant enough moment to be celebrated by all of us. So we think it is justified.
From what you have said, you've only outlined and enumerated some historical perspective, but in history also comes what one needs to be addressed in the present. And well, we may talk about all the issues about imperialism and new colonialistic thoughts and suggestions and the paradigm shifting in what the world order currently is. In the current state, as we have the continent, and the difficulties and challenges bedeviling the continent, do you think that perhaps in the current milieu of the way things are, we need to have a certain mind shift towards the way we address our own challenges within the global perspective or sphere?
Yeah. You know, it has been said that globalization started from the coasts of Africa, from the coast of Ghana. As a matter of fact, that was the first time labor was taken from one continent, albeit forcibly, to another continent to produce goods for sale in yet another continent. That was the beginning of tying up the world economy between land, labor, and capital together. So even as you talk about the struggles of today, and they need to focus on today, today has a link with yesterday. And so does it have a link with tomorrow. It is what you do today that determines your well-being tomorrow. So there's a continuum, there's a historical continuum, and I'm saying that for us in Ghana, at least those of us who grew up under Kwame Nkrumah, we were always made to recognize that our existence was interlinked with the world economy. And I think that notion is as true today as it was yesterday. And that is what makes Africa Day relevant, because Africans have the opportunity to think about how far they have come and then to begin to vision the kind of future that they are capable of creating for themselves.
That level of thinking, is it across board? Is it being done in unison?
Well, to an extent, you could say that, but to varying degrees of intensity. I mean, growing up in Ghana, African unity was a thing. In other places, it was not so important. But you find people look at Ghana as the kind of the pace setter, the leader in thought, because we were fortunate to have at independence groups of leaders who saw their future not in an isolated mold, who saw their future as linked up with the rest of the continent and to the rest of Africa at large. And it began to dawn on me, this heritage, this importance, as I grew up in the foreign service and had the privilege to visit many countries and to represent Ghana at several fora. And one always found it very invigorating and very spiritually satisfying when they referred to Ghanaians as being naturally Pan-Africanist. I recollect a particular summit where we're having a ministerial preparatory to the summit, when the meeting almost broke up in array because of differences between the bureau. Now, the bureau was dissolved, a new bureau was appointed, as it were, and when the chairman took the floor, all he said was that, look, fellow Africans, fellow ministers, in the name of Kwame Nkrumah, shall we sit down and do this work for Africa before the president came? There was tumultuous clapping, silence, everybody sat down like schoolboys, and they got to work. So there was
consensus thereafter?
There was consensus immediately when Africans' minds were directed to the source and to the importance of the mission at hand. And for that, I think we have some credit because of Kwame Nkrumah's heritage.
Well, we have a number of challenges on the continent.
We do.
Wars are abound.
We do.
Strikes are abound.
We do.
Difficulties are abound economically.
Economic problems.
And
yes.
there's an area of thoughts that perhaps following all the early beginnings decades ago of Pan-Africanism, the continental elite have not carried on with the vision adequately, not in the Pan-Africanistic way of thinking, but very parochial. Do you share in that thought?
I know that there's a certain amount of cynicism because people aspire for so much and they're impatient for progress, and that's understandable. But we also have to understand that the world moves at its pace, and that no matter how enthusiastic you may be, there are only 24 hours in a day, and you can only do so much. The important thing is to be on the right track and to have the support of the people that you purport to represent in carrying them forward. You cannot be too far ahead of them, not too far behind. There is a certain kind of rhythm between your movement and the people you purport to lead. Now, there were times when people thought that Ghana's resources were wasted by Kwame Nkrumah in trying to help other African countries to independence. Kwame Nkrumah saw the continent as a whole, and it is true, no progress can be made while there's strife elsewhere. But the world does not afford you the luxury of choosing what to do and when to do it. The problems come together, and you have to try and understand them and solve them on a day-by-day basis, even as you think about the longer-term problems. So they are linked in many, many ways. Yes.
After World War II, we've seen how progressively Europe has made positive strides, and even though we may be having current challenges with Russia and its concerns with Ukraine and the rest of the EU and all those polarity, you could see that if we would have to look at the progress made by the EU, and what progress we're making with the AU and the other sub-regional bodies, then we seem to be progressing on a very snail pace or tortoise-like pace. And
that's a fair point you're making, because if you recall that the idea of unity, the idea of integration came to Africa even before it came to Europe. Europe had been known for wars and strifes. And there were times when you were in Europe, to go from Germany to Belgium, you had to cross borders, you have to get down, show your passport, and all that is gone now. That's an indication of what Africa can do if you're focused and serious. At the same time, it also shows you that however far back you may be, you can make progress if you persist in a patient, a systematic, and organized manner. And that can be done by us African countries beginning to see that, look, our nation states, as they are, were formed out of external interference. They were man-made, and that the problems that came with it can, by parity of reasoning, be sorted out
how
by
do
man.
we do that reorientation, if not orientation?
I think the African Union is doing that, and is, to a large extent, you'll be amazed at the far-sightedness of some of the documents from the African Union.
Well,
like
those are documents. And
the Constitutive Act, for instance.
well, in Africa, we're very much known for putting together documents, but not promoting the tenets of those documents.
Oh, I do not think that it is totally correct to say that we're known for putting up documents and not promoting them. The documents demonstrate the vision that you want to attain.
And if they are not implemented?
And you have to attain it by recognize that it involves a lot of human, national, international effort to attain that. It doesn't come overnight.
You travel to many African countries. You get to see that, well, you're able to, if you are in the society, get some level of cooperation, perhaps not the real integration you would want, because then there's still, I wouldn't say any homophobic feeling, but that tendency that you're still alien. But then you just move around on the surface. So you could see that the traits of unity are there within the citizenry. What makes it difficult for countries to integrate, to have the mindset that they will need to integrate?
First of all, my experience in other African countries, I feel very much at home.
That's what I'm talking about.
Totally at home.
So what
and
makes
I begin
it difficult
to wonder,
for the countries to...
I begin to wonder at how close really we are. At the same time, the reality is that you are in a different country. You have to show your passport. You have to go to the airport. The policeman will not speak your language.
That's understandable.
And that's the historical, is a result of historical things that have happened. Beneath all those things, let's give Côte d'Ivoire for an example. You arrive in Côte d'Ivoire airport, and there's a big signboard, Akwaba. And you wonder, what? But they have Akwaba as much their own, Kente as much their own as us. The truth is that all along the border, the people are the same. They speak the same language. One may be speaking French, one may be speaking English, but they speak local language, the same, all from Axim all the way up. And this phenomenon replicates itself at all our borders. What it demonstrates is that the people have the same ethnic contiguity. The division is artificial. And on the face of it might appear artificial and so easy to remove. But the institutional history, the ways of doing things, the laws, the policemen, all have a different jurisdiction. So that it is an effort trying to make laws to unravel this, at the same time getting the people to understand that they are actually the same people. It's a slow, snail-paced kind of work. There are times when you can move in bounds, but generally it's systematic, patient work.
Perhaps that patience we don't have time for, because the other part of the world or the globe is moving. The question then is how key is integration to the whole subject of unity when you get to have a lot more analysis of the diversity of the various sections of the continent being perceived in a very skeptic way.
At the same time, you can see unity in this diversity.
Well, we see it,
Yes.
but there's still skepticism.
There is. But I'm telling you, there's an underlying cohesion, an underlying community of interest among Africans who can be surprising. Let me give you an example of the last World Cup. In Addis Ababa, everybody was in a Ghanaian t-shirt, a Ghanaian flag, a Ghanaian tie. And the residence of the ambassador, when Ghana was playing Uruguay, without invitation.
Just because Ghana was the only country that had remained
representing Ghana,
Africa.
representing
we do
Africa.
Understand that.
I'm telling you, it demonstrates the very deep
How come that
underlying
demonstration
emotions.
It doesn't translate into the vision that is perhaps enumerated by
That is a challenge. That is a
the
challenge.
various charters of the AU and the other sub-regional bodies.
That is a challenge. You know, it's one thing being negative. It's quite another seeing from examples such as this what is possible. The challenge to us now is how to link what is possible and make it what can happen.
Okay.
And that demands work from governments, from people, from civil society, from students. It probably means Africans have to visit each other more often. Students have to have games together, have to share experiences, begin to recognize their common Africanness.
Okay, we do understand all the things you're saying. Because you're a diplomat, you have perhaps better insight, because you have also traveled extensively and dialogued.
Some of it.
Well, on the subject of African unity. Yeah. Wole Soyinka in an address to Harvard students, I believe some 3 years ago, we're being told 2011, is quoted as saying that corruption in Africa, especially in my country, Nigeria, is one of the reasons why the people within countries of Africa will first not listen to their government and so not make it possible for other citizens of other countries to be listened to. It makes it difficult for a talk of African unity to be far-fetched than fetched. Then I have to go to Professor Jeffrey Sykes, who also writes in his book on civilization that inflows onto the continent are taken away by technocrats in Europe and the Americas, but it is also with the connivance of the political elite on the continent. This is bringing a lot of strife, unemployment, and a lot of poverty to the people of Africa. What do you say to these?
Well, far be it from me to comment on somebody like Wole Soyinka's very profound views. I believe that corruption is a problem, but I believe that corruption is a problem that can be addressed by law. Corruption is a problem that can be addressed by democracy. The issue is to expose these matters and prosecute them. One must understand that corruption, is action between two consenting, perhaps very powerful adults, makes it difficult to investigate. That must not discourage you from investigating. I think that the issues are issues of governance. If you have governance, openness, transparency, it makes it less possible for gargantuan acts of corruption to persist because they'll be exposed. I will be the first to admit that cannot be done overnight. It's a whole process, and that process is a continuing process. Okay, it is normal for people to want to achieve things overnight. Kwame Nkrumah used to say that when it comes to development of Ghana and Africa, he admits to be impatient. A certain impatience is understandable. But the reality is that life moves on and moves on slowly, inexorably, on its
You're
way.
a diplomat, so that slowness suits you because you feel dialogue and diplomacy is the best way to go. But on the continent where we have young people, especially in the northern part of Africa, agitating for excessive democratic rights and excessive freedom of speech, then we have, you come to sub-Saharan Africa, poverty is rife, unemployment is huge, and there's perceived corruption by government on the continent. Then it calls for perhaps not a drastic,
radical action,
not necessarily a radical action, but a more than just the normal painstaking processes that would need to be undertaken to make sure we get there.
At the same time, you must understand that government is through representation. So if the impatience of the electorate is that stark, they could channel this impatience through political action, through votes, through democracy. That is the only way. Whatever you do, at the end of the day, you have to sit and talk and plan and find how to go. And it might be boring to be painstaking, but there's no other way around it. You have to analyze the problems. You have to slowly examine them, find out various options, and find out from your own people which options suit them best, and try to give expressions to those options. That is the essence of democracy. But it doesn't come in a day.
Some of the questions I'm asking, not because you're Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, but because you're an esteemed diplomat. Now, in your
I don't know about that.
Okay. In your own observation, what lessons do you think we have learned from the European integration, and we still need to learn, or are still learning from the European integration?
I think that we have to patiently continue to understand each other as Africans, know our history, and then we'll begin to see that we have so much more in common and doing things together. So we take countries which are contiguous to try and address problems along each other's borders by discussion, negotiation, finding out the best ways. And you find that our problems are the same. Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire could do a lot together. So can Ghana and Burkina, or Ghana and Togo. And you find that goods will be flowing slowly. That is what to ensure, that is what to ensure the dynamism of the economy. There's no other way.
You talk about commonality.
Communality
okay.
of interest.
Okay.
If you look at Africa, we are, as it were, a cynic once said, we're united by poverty. You go to any other African country, and the scenario is the same. Children playing soccer on the roadside, somebody making cocoa by the roadside, a baby crying. The same. Africa is basically the same.
Well, we talk about that. Those are inferences that we philosophically make, like in speeches you're making on this very platform. But the point, it doesn't translate in the mindsets and the workings of governments that need to make these realities.
Yeah. That is the challenge of government in Africa. That's the challenge of the African Union, to make itself better known, to make its ideals better understood. Because if it didn't exist today, we'll have to invent it. It's the only way forward for us.
The AU, this is second integration, so to speak,
That's
or
right.
composition from OAU, so
That's
to speak.
right. That's right.
What do you think is the relevance of the body, and will it have any significance at all, going by the way we're going in the next decade?
You know, there was a time when Africans did not think they had anything at all in common. A Nigerian thought he had nothing to do with a Ghanaian, Sudanese. These days, twice a year, African leaders sit together at summits, from ambassadorial through ministerial to presidential, addressing each other's problems as a continent together. That in itself slowly is bringing together leaders getting to know each other, ministers getting to know each other, sharing problems, finding out that the problems are the same, visioning out solutions together. It's a slow pace taking progress, but it is progress all the same.
At what level do we need to take this level of progress, even though you have termed it slow?
I think the important thing is for this to percolate down to the populations, right down to the villages, to everybody.
And who needs to start it? Is it the respective governments? or perhaps
I
civil
think
society?
it's as much a continental,
or is a stakeholder
a governmental,
effort?
a stakeholder. It's everybody's task. It's the task of those who are educated to help those who are not educated. The task of those who share those views to try and win back those who do not. Because, as President Nyerere said one time, we have no other choice but unity. Unity will not bring us everything, but without unity, we'll be totally lost. And perhaps we might say this in acknowledgement of the great value to the people of Ghana to have had someone like President Kwame Nkrumah as his first leader, because he brought up this idea and put this out there on the agenda, and it has never left the agenda.
The whole process of emancipation has evolved to the stage where economic emancipation is now necessary. We're being told that Africa is now a haven for the next level of economic incursions by the other continents of the world. And really, we've seen the invasions in quotes by not only Europe, now a long-time interest of the United States, and more lately, China. Okay. So how do we need to ready ourselves to make sure that all the emancipation we talk about economically comes to pass?
This is as much, in my view, challenge as opportunity. You know, they come together, the dangers associated with it, the promises associated with it. The fact that China has entered the world economy in such a systematic and positive manner is what has given rise to the improvement in the price of our primary commodities. And it's what has given rise to the whole notion of an Africa rising, because suddenly there's competition, there's demand for things that we have that other people do not have. But we should not take this for granted, because it's not going to last forever. What we need to do is to take advantage of this increase in value of the things that we have, to introduce factors into our production process, to introduce science and technology and knowledge into the way we go about things, so that we can now master our economy properly. We can now begin to sell within each other as Africans, have greater intra-African trade and commerce, create a common free trade area for Africa, remove tariffs between African countries, and have a dynamic, integrated African economy. When we are able to do that, then as a continent, we're able to negotiate for better terms with the external world. Then we'll be beginning to develop a more confident Africa, integrated.
What you're saying
yes,
is not different from the political integration Nkrumah perceived some 5-6 decades ago.
Absolutely true, and it's an indication of the vision of Kwame Nkrumah, because what we are talking about in Africa today as Agenda 2063 is straight out of Africa Must Unite. The whole concept was conceived of, analyzed, planned, and written, put on paper about Kwame Nkrumah. All that the AU is trying to do today is try to realize Kwame Nkrumah's dreams. And even that, you could say, they're still about 50 years behind Kwame Nkrumah. This is the great heritage of Ghana, and this is what we have to tout and expound as we develop the brand Ghana, the brand of the Black Star.
Well, we do understand. We may tout and project our brand and project what the historical perspective is.
And work for it.
Well, we do understand that. But how then do we bring continentally the various sections we have in Africa to make sure that that very vision of getting economically emancipated is achieved?
At the moment,
because the world is not waiting for us.
The world is not waiting, and we're moving as well.
We're moving slowly.
We're moving slowly, but we're hoping that it develops into a crescendo. The African Union has divided Africa into various regional economic groupings. We're hoping that as ECOWAS, or as Maghreb, or as SADC, they free the obstacles to the integration within each, and the process have a continent-wide putting together of the regional economic blocks as building blocks. we're moving slowly, and I believe Kwame Nkrumah will say we are even too slow. But then again, life is one day at a time. It is natural for you to wish for things to move faster than they really do. And it's a good thing if people feel that way, because that's the impetus that moves the people forward. At the same time, we cannot abolish reality. Reality is there and it's staring us in the face. Whatever we do, we have only 24 hours in a day.
Perhaps Africa is stuck in a reality for which Africa is very euphoric about.
Yes.
A very
Yes,
slow
yes,
pace that
yes.
that shows that the world is not waiting for us. Now, if we would have to get onto the impartation of the next generation on the subject of African unity, how does it need to be done?
Education. Education. We have to put the real history into our textbooks and let our students read that from infancy. We could have books like Africa Must Unite as set books in English literature. We have to inculcate these ideas into our youth from childhood. Let them understand that Nelson Mandela is as much theirs as Kwame Nkrumah. Let Africans see what is common among them. And let's be careful about removing some very subtle notions of inferiority that has been left in some of our literature by the departing colonial system, I would say. But I think that basically we are on the right track, and in Ghana we have a very strong heritage of independence and progress, which we celebrate. We celebrated not too long ago, last week, the 15th anniversary of Otumfo's ascendance to the throne. I mean, Otumfo has been a remarkable example of what Asante Man has achieved for Ghana. 3 or 4 centuries of uninterrupted governance, African governance, there for all to see. It just shows you what is possible to achieve in Africa.
And talking about Otumfo, bringing to mind the subject of Kwame Nkrumah, how key is leadership in all these efforts we're talking about?
Leadership is key, but then again, leadership can only come from the people. So it is said that the people deserve the leadership they have. You can only be a leader of the people who follow you, and it's they who make you the leader. So it's a reflection of the political development of the people. Kwame Nkrumah used to say that it is when the women of Africa are really free in their minds that you see development come. It's a reflection of the social development of all the people. That's what leadership is about. Leadership is from the people. It cannot come from outside.
Let's now look at your office then. You're supposed also to be in charge of regional integration, right?
That's right.
Okay. How's that going so far?
Fairly well. We have just had the privilege of having our president elected the chairman of the West African Economic Community, ECOWAS, which for a young dynamic president in only his first term is a great credit to him and to the country. So we have, in the next couple of days, we're going to have a special conference of African leaders here. In another week or 2, we'll have the Council of Ministers conference. It puts a lot of responsibility on us in Ghana to get our institutions together to support our president to achieve the integration. You remember that he announced for himself regional integration, infrastructure, peace and security as the challenges that he's going to address most. In West Africa today, we have this issue of peace and security in the biggest country, Nigeria, which is an issue now facing all of us. As you know, whatever happens in Nigeria will have effects on us here. If your neighbor's house is on fire, you are duty bound to help to sort it out. So it's as much a problem for Nigerians as for Ghanaians and for the rest of us in West Africa.
The way you say it, the problems have compounded, right? From well, perhaps country difficulties. Now we have intra-country difficulties.
Intra-country difficulties, and
that's enormous.
And they threaten to become continental if you don't address it properly.
How do we go about integration in a sub-region where perhaps we have two dominant languages, English and French, that don't see any level of assimilation at all?
You know, in what you might call a very perverse way, I think that the fact of two different dominant languages in our region, and I imagine you're talking about French and English,
definitely,
could, precisely because of the way it is, become a factor for integration. Imagine a situation where, when we used to be in high school, French was compulsory. That was in Nkrumah's time, because he was thinking about a continentally integrated continent. Imagine a situation where you have national servicemen from Ghana, under whatever program you can think of, teaching English in, say, Cote d'Ivoire, from primary school all the way to university, and having a situation, a reciprocal vice versa situation, with French graduates who are unemployed in Cote d'Ivoire teaching French in Ghana from primary school. Have a system, have a program of these exchanges. First of all, it's going to aid in understanding each other as a people. It's going to aid in understanding French or English. It's going to become a dynamic for cooperation. It could set other things in trade. You know, there are various ways to creatively...
Somebody said that's a figment of your imagination.
It could well be. But you know, the...
means can't be fruitful, can it?
I think that if properly pursued, you never know where it could bring us. It could bring employment to unemployed graduates. It could get African youth to get to know each other. When we were in high school, we used to have university games. We used to have King's College Ash Potter games. We used to go to each other's countries. We developed friendships from very early ages.
Actually, university games are still held.
Yeah. All these are factors of integration. People get to know each other and begin to understand that they are not as different, or may not be as different as they may have been brought up to perceive. These are all little things that can move us forward, in my view.
In the ECOWAS Charter is always a talk about free movement of goods and services across borders.
That's right. That's right.
We hear that all the time.
That's right.
In reality, it doesn't happen.
It is not easy. I know it is not easy. Just try taking an articulator of goods from Accra to Togo, then you know that it is not easy. But here again, the problem has been identified, and there's an attempt to address it. You can have your opinion on how successful we have been at addressing it, but the problem remains there. And you know, identification of a problem is halfway to its solution. It shows you that we have difficulties, but that doesn't mean you should give up.
How is President Mahama intending to bring the rest of his colleagues in the sub-region to think on the subject of integration?
I think that...
what is the agenda? What is the policy mindset?
No, his three main overriding aims,
as announced:
infrastructure development, peace and security, and integration generally. And I think that these are views shared by all his colleagues. President Ouattara did particularly well on issues of peace and security integration. But you know, the problem is not ended yet. So all he has to do is to pick up that mantle and move it further forward. That is what international governance is about, within the terms of his mandate. And you have to be able to carry the rest of your colleagues with you, and I'm sure he does. He has a certain gravitas among his colleagues. Yeah. How
is the issue of the incursions by Boko Haram in northern Nigeria? And now we can say not only northern Nigeria, perhaps in the whole of Nigeria, a big issue for leaders who are on the continent?
It is. It is. You know, Nigeria is a particularly important country in Africa, and West Africa is a critical country. And if anything begins to destabilize Nigeria, everybody else in West Africa has to be on alert. So you can see that the whole international community is focusing on this problem, from the United States, from the UK, from France, and they're trying to find out the immediate and the longer term aspects of it. I've heard people say that in the long term, it's a question of economic development in the impoverished North. It is the presence of so many unemployed, uneducated youth that makes them particularly susceptible to all kinds of extreme views. And they become easily mobilized with a little enticement to commit acts of the kind of savagery that we have seen. But I think that now that the international community has begun to zero in on it and to assist the Nigerian government, I am hopeful that sooner or later we shall get the bottom of this and to become a thing of the past. But for the moment, it is a threat that worries everybody.
How is that a threat to other countries in the sub-region?
For us in Ghana, as an example, we have almost the same socio-economic makeup. Anything which happens to the neighboring country, which is bad, should set us on the alert. And I think it's the same for most other African countries.
At the level of ECOWAS, at what stage is the discussion on how to improve the security situation in Nigeria?
I think it's
especially from spilling over to...
Yeah, I think it's a key question that all the agitating the minds of all the African leaders now. For the moment, is the most important issue, because you know, without peace and security, you cannot even begin to develop your economy, let alone develop your democracy. So it's a very basic thing that everybody has to address. This is the key question consuming everybody at the moment. Yeah.
And how do we address the issue of infrastructure? For example, you go to countries in Europe, you can always get a tube from London. Straight away you go through the channel to France, and you get to France, you go to the next Germany. From Germany you can go to, if you want, Italy. In the Netherlands you can always go, and thereafter you can connect to the other areas within the peninsula or near the Mediterranean.
With us, we probably have to think of more basic means. We have to think in terms of roads and railway, but even that requires a lot of resources which we have to mobilize. Yeah, it requires a lot of resources.
We have a long way to go then.
Sorry?
We have a long way to go then.
Yes, but we have come a long way as well.
What usually will agitate the minds of leaders on the continent, especially at the level of the AU, that the discussions when they are having will take into cognizance the difficulties perhaps that are being experienced in Somalia, difficulties that are experienced in the Sahelian regions, the northern part of Mali, etc. That will make sure that within all the differences, we tend to have the same passion to make sure perhaps economies are improved, employment is created for the teeming youth, so that the agenda is a way forward one for everybody.
You speak about Somalia. Somalia was a failed state for a long time.
Has always been a failed state.
Somalia is beginning to put its act together.
Really?
Yes. And thanks largely to Kenyan and Ugandan troops. Of course, they're also suffering some of the consequences. But Somalia, at the moment, we're beginning to see the beginnings of stable governance in Somalia. We made some progress in Somalia. Not as much as we would have liked, but we have made some progress. There was the problem of Mali after the overthrow of Gaddafi, and troops and heavy weapons descending down to create instability in the northern part of Mali. That is a challenge that has been largely addressed, though there's still issues to be dealt with. that is some progress. You know, the situation is never static. Life is never static. And that's what makes it important to have effective governance in place. Government satisfying the basic needs of the people, taking care of their security, the education of children, to ensure that the next generation is better than the generation before. That's the duty of government. But it demands resources, it demands educated people, it demands dedication, it demands support from the external world. And the answers are not always as forthcoming as we would have liked. But you have to keep pushing on.
The armed agitation and conflicts that we have on the continent, and we've had for a very long time, is it because perhaps governance in countries is bad, or the people are just not given the free will to express their views and get their own elected people in office?
Yeah, it is part...
Or perhaps also attributed to extreme poverty.
Is it part all that? It is part poverty, it is part history, but they are all interlinked. We have been lucky in Ghana in the sense that even in the most difficult of times...
We call it lucky, it's not because of conscientious effort?
Well, I'm told that luck comes to those who are prepared. So in a way you could say it's part of conscientious effort, is part of our history. I mean, the people of Ghana are said not to like bloodshed and to want to preserve their peace. And you have seen it in several times when the stability of the nation appeared to have been in danger. But Ghanaians always rally together for a common purpose, to keep our nation peaceful and safe. And as of now, I think Ghanaians are beginning to take pride in their democracy, in their freedoms, in the fact that whatever it is, you can vote and change a government, you can vote a new government in. Ghanaians are becoming very, very, very participative. They're very interested in what goes on. If you listen to the FM stations, at the comments that come from ordinary people, I cannot help but be fascinated at the enthusiasm and interest of Ghanaians for the welfare of their country. And I think so long as you have that, your future is assured.
Because our discussions now is progressing towards democracy and governance, etc.
That's right.
From all your travels, how is Ghana becoming a limelight, a shining example for countries on the continent?
Yeah, you know, the one thing that strikes me when I travel out and I see the kind of admiration people have for Ghana. In Ethiopia, I was surprised to find the national newspaper headline, "We must emulate Ghana." You drive through the city of Addis Ababa, and people know the number of the Ghana ambassador's car, and they shout "Black Star." And then you come home, and then you listen to the radio, and it's as if all hell has broken loose, and you wonder, how come this contrast? I mean, there's a certain admiration for Ghana outside that Ghanaians in Ghana do not seem to realize. I was privileged to lead a joint commission to Guinea, and the Guinean president said he was fascinated by the Supreme Court process, that he listened to it every morning. And I wonder, what? Whereas in Ghana, people do not even see that it was an achievement for a country to have disputed an election result and sorted it out in such a gentlemanly, rule of law fashion. Whereas the loser came to comment and agreed to carry on. You know, we have little things that people appreciate. That I'm sure deep down we do appreciate, but perhaps tend to take for granted. And I think that it is useful if we begin to appreciate each other a lot more and know the value and worth of the process that we have here. Appreciate some of our heroes, President Rawlings, President Nkrumah, President Mahama, President Kufuor, Nana Addo. You know, we're a group of very, very decent, highly cultured people leading our country. In some places, they don't have the benefit of that kind of quality and want to emulate us. But we are here seeking to emulate them. I mean, I remember when this another article which appeared in the newspaper in Addis Ababa. I don't know which newspaper said Ghana will be like Rwanda, and they put in their front page Ghana will be like Rwanda, and they put a question mark that why Rwandans want to be like Ghana. There are Ghanaians who want to be like Rwandans. I mean, they found it very, very, very odd. But there we are. Let's learn to appreciate each other.
In that respect,
yeah.
How far do you think that countries on the continent are taking the step to making sure that the fundamentals of their democracies are respected, are consolidated, and then adequately the implementation processes are well in place?
Well, I can always
For example, there should be free speech and respect for the tenets of the Constitution.
That's
there should be freedom to be able to elect at free will their own leaders in a very transparent, dispassionate and objective
I
manner.
can only speak with any level of confidence about Ghana. The situations in other countries are not exactly the same.
Good.
And I believe that the democracies are affected by the realities on the ground in those countries.
Meaning?
Meaning that democracy will not be the same everywhere. But with the African Union as an overall kind of umbrella, with the Constitutional Act of the African Union being like the constitution for the African continent, they've set certain standards that all African countries are slowly trying to attain, and with the attainment of those standards, guarantees such as peace, security, economic development, and integration will follow in the wake, however slowly.
Do I get the understanding that you're saying that, well, there's no global benchmark for emulating what democracy is or implementing what democracy is, but only conceptualized based on the inherent factors or characteristics of societies, based on how they are composed and how they run? And so democracies will be shaped based on what societies are on the continent.
I think that democracy, properly so called, must emanate from the will of the people.
The way they want it.
The will of the people. And if the will of the people differ in various places, so will the contours of their democracy.
Good diplomatic talk. And thank you very much for sharing your time with us. We hope to have you sometime again to join us for perhaps better discussions on the subject of not only African unity, but issues of integration and what the policy is as far as Ghana on integration on the continent. And we've had Ambassador Kwesi Kwartey. He is Ghana's Deputy Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration Minister. And thanks for joining us this morning. We've been discussing the African Union and the issues surrounding the significance of the day, the AU Day, and whether at all the subject of integration and political and economic emancipation will be achieved. Thanks for joining us for the first part of the discussions on AM Talk. We'll have a lot more discussions for you on the AM show. Do stay on. We'll be right back with a lot more.